Welcome everybody to Surprisingly Relatable, where we bring you fun and realistic pro tips, knowledge, and hacks you can use for real to build win-win relationships and make work-life balance a reality. My name is Holly Burby, and each week I'll share with you a thought, story, or self-awareness shortcut that will help you to get unstuck, reconnect to your significance, and get focused and clear so you can relate to the people you care about the most. I truly believe that if we want to live a life of purpose and passion, it's time we put away the fake nicey nice and get to the root of how we can actually connect with each other in our homes and communities. That is how we can all succeed and move toward what we each want most. So if you're ready to be surprisingly relatable and evoke positive change that supports, uplifts, and inspires you and others in the world, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the difference between being emotional and being vulnerable. And you may have seen the title to today's episode. You may have voted on a recent poll that I put up on social media and said, yes, I want to know about that topic. Or maybe you're looking at this topic going, wait, is there a difference between being vulnerable and being emotional in the first place? Isn't it the same thing? Or maybe you think to yourself, isn't being vulnerable bad? Isn't that something I'm supposed to avoid in my life because it has a bad reputation? So I'll be answering all of those questions in this episode, and it all begins with something that was kind of painful and embarrassing that happened with myself and my very first coach that I hired about 8 or 9 years ago from the time I'm recording this. So all that is in store for you today. And after I define for you the difference between emotional and vulnerable, I'll then explain why do they get confused for each other in the first place. When we do confuse one for the other, how does that negatively impact our relatability, the way that we handle ourselves and work with people in relationships in our life? So I definitely want to make sure I tackle those things with you. And then I'm going to leave you today with a simple method, my favorite method that I've been telling my clients for years that you can implement immediately if you're seeking to practice being vulnerable in your life. And again, why would you want to be vulnerable? I will get to that in today's episode. So let's go back a number of years to the first time I hired a professional coach. I have told this story so many times. Shout out to Joe, because I know I'm going to have to share this episode with him. I know he'll be happy to hear the story because I've told it again 1,000 times because it means so much, and it was a truly life-changing moment, more so in retrospect than in the moment, but it was still pretty big. So I hired a life coach. At this point in my life, I think I was 35 years old, 34, somewhere in there. And I barely knew what a life coach or a professional coach was. But I had met my now friend, Joe, through a number of people. And I had attended a workshop that he hosted. I got a lot out of it. And then I found out that he offered one-on-one coaching sessions over, at the time, Skype. And so I remember us hopping on our first coaching session, and he was getting to know me. And again, his intention as a life coach was to support me in getting more in touch with what it was I wanted from my life. I was really in a part of my life where I was in a transition. I was getting clear on, okay, I left my career in teaching. Where am I headed now? What do I want in my romantic partnership? Was that working out? In short, the answer is no, it was not at the time. And so I remember on the call, he asked me about my desires for my life and what I really wanted. And then he said, well, why do you think you don't have those things? And as I'm sharing why I didn't think I had those things, I made so many excuses. Everything from I don't think I'm capable to I don't have enough money to I'm overweight to I'm too opinionated. Insert whatever you want here. I probably said it. And I started crying when I was sharing this on this coaching call. And so I begin to get upset, and he says to me, "You know what one of your issues is, Holly?" And coaches don't, by the way, like diagnose and say issues. I don't even remember if he even used the word issues specifically. But he says something along those lines of, "Do you know what one of your issues is? You are not vulnerable. You are emotional, but you're not vulnerable." And here I am with red face, puffy eyes, crying. And I looked at him because, again, we're on video chatting. And I said, "What do you mean I'm not vulnerable? Look at me. I'm falling apart right now just talking about this." And he said, "No, you have heightened emotions, but you are not vulnerable." And I was so angry, everyone, when he said that to me. I was so angry. I was thinking, how can you look at me and think that I am not vulnerable? Because to me, I thought being vulnerable and being emotional were one and the same. And through that conversation, and then again, years of personal development and courses and being coached and learning many, many, many distinctions of transformation, I now know the difference between being emotional and being vulnerable, and why vulnerability is so valuable. Emotions are so valuable as well, but vulnerability is really a massive key to having the type of relationships and relatability with those in our lives that we are probably striving for. When emotions are heightened, we probably are not having the kinds of connections in our life with people that we want to, depending on those emotions. And if our vulnerability is non-existent because we avoid it, or we don't know that it's not part of who we are, or we're not showing it, and again, I'll define all these in a moment, that also is going to impact our ability to relate to people. And so let's break down why in that moment I was emotional and not vulnerable. I think it's safe to say that every single one of us has emotions. I always think of emotions as having a wide range. And so on one side of the range are all the things that we would consider positive emotions: being happy, being joyful, being at peace, feeling contentment, feeling fulfilled, love, all those good things. And on the other side are the emotions that we, for the most part, would consider our less pleasing emotions, the negative ones: sadness, anxiety, depression, stress, frustration, embarrassment, you name it. It's shame, it's over there. And something I've learned over the years is my willingness to experience the full range of emotions all the way down the positive end will also determine how much I let myself feel the full range of emotions all the way down to the negative end of that spectrum. And so if I can feel my emotions to the greatest extent possible, that's going to make me a more fully expressed person. And the more ways I have to express myself fully gives me a greater chance at actually relating to other people, because other people will feel themselves just kind of vibe with me, or they see a little bit of themselves in me or in my emotions especially. And the fact of the matter is, and this comes from Brene Brown's latest book, Atlas of the Heart, the reality is, based on data, the majority of the population only can identify 3 emotions: that they're feeling happy, sad, or angry. And so the point of Brene Brown's latest book, An Atlas of the Heart, is she defines the other 70 plus emotions that people will discuss on a common basis, but they're people who are speaking to their coaches, to their counselors, to their therapists, to their social workers. These are people who are actively taking an opportunity to go and talk about what they are experiencing in their emotions. But the general population who isn't taking advantage of those opportunities, or if they don't have access to it, they can tell us how they feel by saying, I'm happy, I'm sad, or I'm angry. And that's pretty much where it stops. That is how limited so many of us are in that range of emotions. We really only stick to that central area. Not way too happy, not way too much peace or pleasure or ease. And on the other side of it, same thing. Don't get too far low. Don't get too sad. Don't get too down. Everyone tries to stay in the middle. And so that day on the call with my coach, where I was crying and upset, I thought that people would connect with me if they were thinking, wow, oh man, I see Holly on this coaching call. I'm coaching her. I imagined that Joe would look at me and have thought in that moment, wow, she's really sad. She must really need some love or attention or affirmation or someone to encourage her in some way. And that is not at all what his perception of me was in that moment. The reality of that moment is I was pretty much acting like a whiny victim. And I use the word victim not to downplay victimization that are massive in life and in the world, but I use the word victim kind of in a lighter way to say nothing was my fault. Everything was because something didn't go my way because of this person or this circumstance or this argument. I wasn't ready to take ownership of what I call my side of the fence. The actions I wish I had taken in my life to get me closer to the things that I said that I really wanted. And a lot of times what did work for me growing up and even through my 20s and even a little into my 30s was just crying and having a fit. And eventually someone would come to my rescue or comfort me or tell me that, oh, you're being silly. You're not, I see that you're sad and upset, but you're really great. So it was kind of like if I could just act like an emotional victim in that moment, I found ways to get what I needed emotionally. And this became a pattern because I did it my entire life. As a child, as a teen, as a young adult, as a late 20, early 30 something. And here I was on a coaching call with a coach who saw right through me and said, you are not vulnerable. You are emotional. And I was like, oh, I was so mad. I was so mad. How dare this guy say that? He doesn't even know me. I was so mad. But really, I was upset because my plan had been foiled. Somebody called me out on what I was doing. And he was able to point out to me, hey, these heightened emotions, your emotions are valid. Your emotions are important, but you are not coming off to people as you think you are. They don't see you as vulnerable. They see you as emotional. And that is not showing them that you're relatable. It's showing them the opposite. So that's eventually where we went with this. So we all have emotions. You may be a person who experiences happy, sad, angry right in the middle. You might be a person who, similar to me as I am today, does allow myself to feel the full range of the good all the way down to the grief and the sadness, because I understand the importance of allowing my emotions to take that entire swing of that pendulum. It's so, so important. And I know it will increase my ability to understand people and relate to people. Or you might be someone, again, happy, sad, angry, and that is it. So what then, if I'm in the moment, if I was being emotional and not vulnerable, then what is vulnerability anyway? Vulnerability over the years has gotten a bad reputation as simply meaning weakness. If something is vulnerable, it is weak. And if you do look this up in a dictionary, roughly speaking, it will say something along the lines of you are prone to being hurt. When you are vulnerable, it is an act where when you are vulnerable, you are susceptible to being attacked. That doesn't sound very great at all. And so people in time have began to define being vulnerable as, oh, I'm letting my guard down. I'm letting the wall down. And if my guard is down, my wall is down, the armor is gone, people are going to come at me. They're going to attack. They're going to challenge me in a way that I don't care to be challenged. And that's just going to make my life more difficult. So therefore, I'll just never be vulnerable. Because why would I ever set myself up to be that weak? Or why would I ever set myself up to allow people to come into my life and into my space in that way? I will just never be vulnerable, and I'll keep my walls up and my armor on. That, my friends, is how most people think vulnerability would appear. But the reality of being open to attack, that definition, vulnerability simply means that you are showing who you are to other people. And yes, a result of that could be that you emotionally could be hurt. You could be. But the power of vulnerability, and again, what's surprisingly relatable or not, is that the more valuable or the more vulnerable we are in our day-to-day life, in our personal life and in our professional life, people are more likely to relate to us. And if they don't relate to us, if anything, your vulnerability will be what can empower them to become a different version of themselves that they want to be. Because in my opinion, being vulnerable simply asks of you to be your authentic self, to say the things that you really want to say, to phrase them the way that you really want to phrase them and not feel the need to spin something or code it in a way that other people will approve of you more. It is simply you. Here's who I am. Here's what I believe. Here's what I think. I'm not saying to be brutally honest, and that's another episode for another day, for example. But at minimum, we're putting ourselves out there without the walls and without the armor. And not because we're saying, hey, come and attack me, but rather it's, hey, I'm here. I'm open. This is who I truly am. Who out here relates to me? Who out here wants to make the attempt to understand me, to be there with me, to stand beside me in the things that are important to us? So vulnerability is very attractive because it's magnetic. People will see something in you. They'll hear something you say and they will flock to you. They want to be in partnership with you in a variety of ways. Again, personally, professionally, even when you are more vulnerable, for example, as a parent with your young kids or your adult kids, you are showing them your humanness. And when we're showing people our humanness, it takes away this idea of one of us is better than the other person. It begins to have a common playing field where people say, okay, I think they really do care about me because what they're saying and what they're expressing right now, yeah, I've felt that way before. Absolutely. So that's what we want to think of vulnerability as. It's simply an opportunity for you to authentically express what you think and how you feel. So can your emotions and your vulnerability go together? I'm talking about today the difference between being emotional and being vulnerable, but can they coexist? And the answer is yes, because you are a human being and you will always have your emotions, regardless of if they're the positive kind or the good kind or the bad kind or the negative kind, whatever. You will always have your emotions. But what my coach pointed out to me that day on that call with him was I was sitting there and crying and causing a fuss and whining about my life and blaming other people for why I didn't have what I really wanted. And he saw that even as I was exuding these heightened emotions, I still had a wall up. I still had my armor on. I was not being truthful with him, let alone with myself, about why I didn't have the things that I wanted. I wasn't being totally upfront with him about the things I was actually afraid of the things I was actually feeling, like feeling insecure or feeling like I wasn't good enough or feeling like I didn't do enough or feeling like I wasn't attractive enough or driven enough. Just put whatever feeling in there. In that chapter of my life, that's really where I was. And that wasn't what I was sharing with him. I was sharing him with him instead, not my vulnerable, authentic feelings and thoughts, but I instead chose to heighten my emotions so that I could seek sympathy from him and hopefully get some sort of reassurance that, okay, you ain't that bad, and that's just not the case, because I hired him as my coach to interrupt my BS, and that's what he did. And in the moment, I was not happy about it. And many years later, it was a major, major moment. So now I've talked a bit about the story and what is vulnerability and what is being emotional. So the last thing I want to cover with you is, what is a simple step that a person can use if you don't feel like you're naturally a vulnerable person? What's a simple step that you can use, implementing it ASAP, so that you can work your way toward living a more vulnerable life? And this is something I absolutely had to practice way back when, because I wasn't really afraid that being vulnerable would be perceived as weakness. I know that that is a belief a lot of people carry. I don't think in that time, 8 or 9 years ago, that I felt that way for myself. But I do know that becoming more vulnerable over time was definitely an intention I set for myself. It was a commitment that I stuck to, and it asked of me to be consistent in trying this method I'm about to share with you over and over and over and over again, until this level of authenticity and openness and vulnerability became me. It became who I am. It's actually one of the things that my clients and my students for years now have said is a superpower of mine. And they're like, how did you get like this? Have you always been this vulnerable, this open? How do you just get out there and share your stuff like that? And the reality is, everyone, I was not always like this. It's been a practice. So here is how I began to take down the walls and start telling people how I actually felt about things, how I actually saw things. And it was simply by any time I had to express my feelings, my thoughts, my sentiments with anyone, if I felt something from the negative side, like let's say I was nervous to talk about it, I was afraid of what they were going to say. I was scared that they wouldn't like my opinion. I was fearing that they would reject me or leave me or walk away. Any of those feelings that normally I would have hid behind and used as an excuse not to say what I was really thinking or feeling. The simple method I used is, when I would sit and have those conversations, I now admitted that feeling right out the gate. So what it would sound like is, I would sit down with the person I had to talk to, and I would say, I'm really afraid to talk to you about this, or I'm feeling scared to chat with you about this, and it's important to me, so I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. Or I might say something like, I have to share something with you and get it off my chest, and I'm afraid to do it because I really am scared that you might reject me, or that you might not understand, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. And that was the method. I started the sentence by simply saying, hey, this is difficult for me to talk about. Even just keeping it simple to something like that. This is challenging for me to talk about. This is difficult for me to talk about. And then sharing with them your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, your ideas, whatever it is. It kind of gives them up front an idea of what you are experiencing in your body and the worry. And that is relatable. That is relatable because we have all had feelings. We've all had times where we felt afraid of rejection. We've all had times where we felt scared or we were nervous to say something, right? And we had to dig up the courage to do it. But we often don't admit it and we don't say it, let alone say it first before we get to the thing we really want to talk about. So what it does when we share that emotion first and let them know where we are at, this method disarms the person you're talking to, metaphorically, right? It lets them know that, hey, like, be gentle with me for a second, or this is my come from. I'm feeling a little nervous. And then they probably likely will even pay more attention to what you are sharing than if you didn't preface it with, I feel this way, or I'm scared, or I'm nervous, or I'm sad to say this. People are more likely to listen to you and really hear you when you enter a conversation with vulnerability and admit how you are actually feeling in that moment. I hope this was helpful, everyone. So again, that's the difference between being emotional, having your emotions, and being vulnerable. Yes, they can happen at the same time. No, being vulnerable is not a bad thing. It does not mean that you are weak. And it does impact how relatable you are to people. If you can be authentic and open and let those walls down and tell people how you actually feel about things and how you see things, and use this as a practice over time, people will connect with who you are being that much more. And your relationships will strengthen. They'll deepen. The amount of patience and compassion and empathy we have for one another will increase. So try out that method. I'm so curious to hear what your takeaway is from this episode. If you have a moment, would you please screenshot this episode, share it to your social media? If you post it in your Instagram stories, please tag me at holly.burby.coaching. I would love for you to share the screenshot of this episode and tell me your greatest takeaway. Maybe share with me something along the lines of, do you consider yourself, after hearing this, more emotional or more vulnerable? Or where do you see some room for growth? Tag friends that you think would really enjoy this episode. Please share it. I really appreciate you listening to this. I can't wait to hear your thoughts. And until next time, I'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening. And if you loved this episode and know of someone else who's passionate about creating authentic relationships with people, please pass them on to me. It would mean the world to me if you help me get this cause and this message out to as many listeners as I can. So please, if you liked what you heard, I'd super appreciate it if you'd take 30 seconds and leave me a 5-star review and share this with your friends. And until next time, show love always, in all ways. And may you discover that we're all surprisingly relatable.